Good afternoon, everyone. In Melbourne, Australia, it's now Thursday afternoon, and wherever you are gathering, I welcome you to explore a very beautiful chapter in John's Gospel. A chapter where Jesus is speaking with his Father, the God he knows as Father. It's as if we're being invited into the very heart of Jesus as he moves forward into his death. I'm now going to share screen with you so you can follow some of the things I want to say. So John 17 really is a most intimate conversation. These are the last words Jesus speaks before the Passion. And so in these words, we get a glimpse of John's understanding of the cross. At the heart of this chapter is Jesus' communion with his Father who loves him. In this communion, he reflects on his mission, which had its origin in God's love for the world. Jesus has come into the world to embody that love, to make it visible and believable. But as the hour will demonstrate, the Father's love for the world is costly. Gathered now with friends, Jesus offers prayers for those who've come and those who will come to believe in him, and that's us. Jesus has brought these friends into friendship with God, but by so doing, they are alienated from the world, which now hates them. So Jesus prays that they can be kept within the intimate friendship of God and kept from the harmful powers of the evil one, who still holds dominion over those in the world. Although only mentioned once at verse 26, the mutual love between God and Jesus, between Jesus and disciples, just pulsates through this chapter. Now, in narrative time, Jesus is at table with his disciples. So this image here of people sharing a meal at a table, keep that in your mind as we move through the words of the chapter. Even though now he is at table with his friends, Jesus knows he is moving to the Father. And so he directs his gaze and his words heavenward. It is a moment of great intimacy, and we are privileged to overhear these words arising from the heart of Jesus. Raymond Brown writes, "The disciple and the reader are part of a heavenly family conversation." This is how the chapter is structured. So just to take you quickly through this. So John 17 opens with Jesus reflecting on his mission, and then in the section of today's gospel, Jesus prays for his disciples and for us, the future believers. That's followed by 3 petitions. Keep them in your name, keep them from the evil one, consecrate them in truth. Those petitions come to a conclusion, and then the chapter concludes with a statement about Jesus' identity and mission. So Jesus' prayer formally begins with verse 9. I am asking on their behalf. I am not asking on behalf of the world, but on behalf of those whom you gave me, because they are yours. All mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I have been glorified in them. And now I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world, and I am coming to you. In those last couple of verses, there is a blurring of time frames. There's the narrative time, at a meal before the cross, when the disciples don't yet grasp the full meaning of Jesus' words. They have not yet received the Spirit Paraclete. That is still to come. It will be in the Passion that they are really drawn into the family relationship with God that Jesus experiences. And it's from within the unity of Father and Son that they will then be able to manifest the divine presence and so glorify Jesus. So it's only from the post-resurrection perspective, the time of the gospel, that the disciples can be said to have glorified Jesus. And it's from this post-resurrection perspective, Jesus speaks of himself as no longer in the world, but his disciples, including you and me, are in the world. And so now the task of being and revealing the presence of God in the world, now that task is the task of the disciples and us. It's in the post-resurrection time that all believers are the ones in whom Jesus is glorified, because we, are the ones who reveal his presence, while he has passed through the Passion and is now in the divine presence of God. After naming whom Jesus is praying for, he then makes 3 petitions. And in these petitions, Jesus reveals the intimate union between himself and believers. Just as Jesus does not belong to the world, neither do disciples. Just as the Father sent Jesus into the world where he faced opposition, so the disciples are sent into the world where they too will face opposition. As Jesus is consecrated, so he prays for the disciples. So let's look at these petitions. The first 2. Holy Father, keep them in your name that you have given me. That is, keep the disciples whom you have given me in your name, so that they may be one as we are one. While I was with them, I protected them in your name that you have given me. I guarded them, and not one of them was lost, except the one destined to be lost, so the scriptures might be fulfilled. Now, Father, I'm coming to you, and I speak these things in the world so that they may have my joy made complete in themselves. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, because they do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. I'm not asking you to take them out of the world, but I ask you to keep them from the evil one. They do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. Notice that these first 2 petitions have parallel words, opposite parallel words. Keep them in your name and keep them from the evil one. So Jesus prays that the disciples will be kept in the Father's name, which means being held within the very being of God, which means they will be experiencing the loving Father-Son relationship. Now, the second petition asks that disciples not be taken from the world, but that they be kept from the power of the evil one. And this raises a paradox. On the one hand, Jesus claims that the ruler of this world has no power over him and has been condemned. And yet he prays that disciples will be protected from this evil one. Also, it's important to know that the term world has many meanings. One sense, it is a world loved by God, verse 3:16. And yet At times it's a world, meaning the world in opposition to Jesus and his disciples. To help us understand this particular petition, we need to get into the way first century Jews were thinking to make sense of some of these conflicting ideas, and particularly to make sense of this ruler of the world. For starters, there are no prayers in the Old Testament asking God for protection from an evil power, a power opposed to God. But when we come to the first century, in Jewish literature, there are a number of examples of such prayers. So I've mentioned there the Book of Jubilees and the Dead Sea Scrolls, where there are examples of prayers like this with a very strong sense that this world is under the dominion of a power, an evil power, sometimes called Satan or Beelzebul or Belial in the scrolls, and in John called the ruler of this world. And you can see those passages there. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. I will no longer talk much with you, for the ruler of this world is coming. And then in John 16, the ruler of this world has been condemned. Now, a scholar who examined a number of these types of prayer for protection against evil, he noted that these prayers presume the existence of an evil power at work in the world, even though there's a presumption that these powers have been defeated and are awaiting a final eschatological destruction. From his study of these late Jewish Second Temple prayers, first century prayers, this scholar sees three ways in which they can help us understand John's Gospel and help us understand this particular prayer. First of all, is that one meaning of this world is the world dominated by the power of an evil one, completely opposed to Jesus and his followers. Second, these prayers express great confidence in the definitive acts of God. The way God has acted in the past, they are absolutely certain God will continue to act and will defeat demonic power in the future in a final eschatological battle, struggle. And in John's Gospel, that struggle is a way of interpreting the cross, that Jesus' death is the way God judges, makes judgment on the world, or people bring judgment on themselves. Though this all-conquering world order holds sway, its days are numbered. It already stands condemned. So there's great confidence that even though there's a presence of evil still in the world until the end of time, it has been condemned, its days are numbered. And thirdly, the petitions are formulated recognizing that as a community, we, the disciples, exist within this world, and we still need divine help to ward off the influence, the unending influence of this evil power. So that's the way these Jewish prayers are framed in the first century. Okay, so now the third petition. The third petition asks that the disciples will be consecrated. Consecrate them in the truth. Your word is truth. As you have sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. And for their sakes I consecrate myself, so that they also may be consecrated in truth. Now, this third prayer that talks about consecration, sometimes translated as sanctification. I think consecrated is a better translation. Once again, it recalls the relationship between Jesus and God. And at a Jewish festival that celebrated the reconsecration of the temple, I'm talking here about the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. It'd be called the consecration of the temple when the Maccabees were able to overthrow the Greeks. And it's during John's discussion or exposition of this festival, Jesus declares that he is the consecrated and sent one of God. Can you say that the one whom the Father has consecrated and sent into the world is blaspheming because I said, I am God's son? You might like to look back at that. That's in John chapter 10:36. So Jesus speaks of himself as already the one consecrated. So just a reminder what some of the themes in John. In John 1:14, we heard the word became flesh and tabernacled among us. So because the glory of God dwells in Jesus, in chapter 2, in the temple, he spoke of his own body as a living temple. And so, as one already consecrated now in chapter 17. Back in chapter 2, though, he spoke about this temple of his body will be destroyed and will be raised up. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. So there's this promise of a new temple being raised. And then in John chapter 14, Jesus describes that this new temple will be a new Father's house, or we might say a Father's household of the disciples. And so Jesus prays that these disciples will also, as living temples, will be consecrated. So when Jesus returns to the Father, there will still be a consecrated living temple in the midst of the disciples. So by participating in Jesus' relationship with God, disciples are drawn into the Father's household, into the very holiness of God. Although they remain in the world, in a sense, they don't belong to the world under the domain of the evil one. Now, some scholars, both ancient and modern, speak of John 17 as a high priestly prayer. And that's why I ask that question. Is John 17 a high priestly prayer? And my answer is no. That Jesus is not speaking as a priest when he speaks of consecration. Jesus speaks as the consecrated living temple, the dwelling of God. Also realize that when Jesus makes an intercessory prayer for his disciples, that type of prayer is not the prerogative of priesthood. From his study of various Old Testament figures who offered prayers for others, a scholar concludes it's observed that although the responsibility for intercession appears to be relatively widely distributed among lay people, kings, and prophets, the responsibility does not fall to the priests. So praying for others is not strictly the role of priesthood. Some also write of Jesus as being both a priest and a victim, like a sacrifice, a sacrificial victim. But again, I don't agree. This sort of cultic imagery is foreign to John's Gospel. If you remember in John 2, Jesus overturned the money tables, collecting the temple tax, and he drove out the sacrificial animals. I don't call that action temple cleansing, because all of those things in the temple are an essential part of Israel's sacrificial system. They're meant to be there. They help the whole system keep going. So when Jesus overturns tables and drives out the animal, he's really overturning the whole sacrificial system of worship and indicating that a new way of coming to God is going to be established. Something new is coming. Later in John 4, when he talks with the woman of Samaria at the well of Jacob, he makes the same point, that God is not to be worshipped in temples, neither this mountain or Jerusalem. He speaks, an hour is coming when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. So John's Gospel moves beyond cultic systems of worship, needing temples and priests and sacrifices. So I wouldn't consider John presenting Jesus as a sacrificial victim. You might also recall that in John 12, Jesus says, now my soul is troubled. What should I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it is for this reason that I have come to this hour. Now is the judgment of the world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. These are not the words of a victim, but a victor. In his final prayer, Jesus is neither priest nor victim. Now, the conclusion to these petitions. Now, read this carefully. I ask not only on behalf of these, but on behalf of those who will believe in me through their word, and that's us, that they may all be one. As you, Father, are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given them, so that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, that they may become completely one, so that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. So this prayer comes to its conclusion by Jesus extending it beyond the immediate group of disciples to include future believers, the future readers of this gospel. Jesus prays for us. And in this section, it's clear that Jesus' desire for unity is not an end in itself, but is a critical aspect of his mission continuing in the world. That this unity he prays for has a purpose. So I actually call this prayer a missionary prayer. Jesus can really only be the true revealer of the Father because of his union with God. And it's from that dynamic unity in love that he is able to reveal and make known the essence of God. Similarly, if disciples are to continue Jesus' mission and reveal God, then they can only do this from within the union of Jesus and his Father. Jesus' desire that they all be one in him and in the Father and among themselves is for the purpose of mission. The revelation of God cannot come from the outside, but can only come from the inside, from within the Father-Son disciple relationship. Being one in God is the only way to reveal God. And then the Gospel on Sunday concludes with the verses at the end of the chapter. Father, I desire that those also whom you've given me may be with me where I am, to see my glory, which you have given me because you loved me before the foundation of the world. Righteous Father, the world does not know you, but I know you, and these know that you have sent me. I made your name known to them, and I will make it known, so that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. So with the formal prayer ended, Jesus now draws his time with his disciples and this conversation with the Father to its conclusion. The disciples are the ones given by the Father to Jesus, and they've come to believe that Jesus was a man sent by God. The disciples are the ones to whom Jesus has revealed something of the very essence of God. And Jesus is only able to be the revealer because of his great love, the love he describes as love of the Father and the Son. Because the disciples, through Jesus, know the Father, they too experience that love of God and the eternity life that Jesus has offered. So I call this a missionary prayer. The language of union and consecration can distract us from the ultimate function of Jesus' words, which is to establish the foundation for the future mission of disciples when Jesus is no longer with them. While Jesus has been present, he has been the one on mission from the Father, sent into the world loved by God, and now when he returns to the Father, the disciples are the ones who will continue that mission to reveal God's performative love for the world. For God's love is active. Love enfolds believers into the Father-Son relationship, making them children of God, freeing them from slavery to an evil power. Humanity is liberated to live with the freedom of children within the household of God and no longer slaves. A Melbourne scholar, John Painter, writes it like this: the success of this mission remains totally dependent on the oneness of those who are sent with the source of divine love, and which may yet transform the world from a place of darkness and terror. Only the visible unity and love among believers can witness to and make present the divine love in this world. And so we have been invited in this chapter into the very heart of Jesus to listen as he prays to his beloved Father. And we found that he's praying for us. Even as Jesus faces his own suffering, his own death, he's conscious of those he leaves behind, of his disciples, and dare I say, of us, and our struggle to keep faith when the world around us has other priorities. And he asks that we may continue to live in love, in his love, in God's love. in the love of each other. Now, this living in love is not self-centered piety. It's the only way we can demonstrate the reality of God's love for the world. So, what might our world be like if we, our nations, dared to put love at the centre of national policy? If we put love over economics, love over armed forces, love over whatever. I think that's the challenge, the invitation of this Sunday's Gospel. Love as I have loved, so that the world may believe. So blessings on you all as you listen to Sunday's Gospel. If the reading that's chosen is the one from John 17, hear it now with the intimacy of having entered into the very heart of Jesus and his desire for his future disciples. Thank you all.